There's something about the man who sits in silence that unnerves us. Not the comfortable silence of contentment, but the heavy, pregnant quiet of words swallowed, emotions buried, truths locked away in the vault of his chest. You know this man. Maybe you are this man. He's the one who says he's fine when everything inside him is screaming. He's the one who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders and refuses to set it down, even for a moment. Because somewhere along the way, he learned that asking for help is weakness, that vulnerability is a betrayal of what it means to be strong. But here's what nobody tells you about that silence. It's not peaceful. It's not noble. It's corrosive. Every unsaid word, every suppressed feeling, every emotion that gets stuffed down instead of expressed doesn't just disappear. It ferments. It calcifies. It transforms into something darker, heavier, more destructive than the original feeling ever was. The anger he won't express becomes rage that leaks out in passive-aggressive comments or sudden explosive reactions over minor inconveniences. The sadness he won't acknowledge becomes a depression that colors everything gray, that makes getting out of bed feel like climbing a mountain. The fear he won't admit becomes anxiety that grips his chest at 3 a.m, that makes his heart race for reasons he can't name. What's happening beneath that stoic surface is a civil war. There are parts of him fighting other parts of him, aspects of his personality that he's deemed acceptable, doing battle with the aspects he's rejected, exiled, pushed into the basement of his consciousness. There's the version of himself he shows the world, capable, controlled, unshakable. And then there's everything else. The wounded child who needed comfort but learned that needing was shameful. The creative spirit who wanted to make art or music or poetry but was told that wasn't practical, wasn't masculine, wasn't worth pursuing. The sensitive soul who feels everything deeply but learned to build walls so thick that even he can't find his way back to those feelings anymore. This internal division isn't just uncomfortable, it's exhausting. It takes enormous energy to maintain these walls, to police the borders between acceptable and unacceptable parts of himself, to constantly monitor what he allows himself to feel and express. That's why he's tired all the time, even when he's slept. That's why nothing brings him joy anymore, not really. Because joy requires openness, and he's spent years learning to close himself off. That's why his relationships feel hollow. Because intimacy requires showing up as a whole person, not just the edited, acceptable version. And the real tragedy? He thinks he's protecting people by staying quiet. He thinks he's being strong by shouldering everything alone. He thinks he's keeping his pain contained, manageable, under control. But pain doesn't work that way. It's not a finite resource that depletes if you just ignore it long enough. It's more like water behind a dam. The pressure builds, and eventually something has to give. Either he finds a way to release it consciously, deliberately, in measured doses, or it will find its own way out through the cracks. Those cracks show up in his body first, usually. The tension headaches that won't quit. The back pain that no amount of stretching or massage seems to fix. The stomach issues that doctors can't explain. The insomnia, the grinding jaw, the clenched fists, even in sleep. His body is keeping score of all the emotions his mind won't process, and it's sending him increasingly urgent messages that something needs to change. But he's learned to ignore those messages too, to push through pain the same way he pushes through feelings. The cracks show up in his relationships next. His partner feels like they're living with a ghost, a shell of the man they fell in love with. They try to reach him, but it's like calling down a well. Their words echo back, but nothing responds from the depths. His friends have stopped asking how he's really doing because they've learned they'll only get the same surface-level responses. "I'm good, man. Just busy with work." His children sense his distance, even if they can't articulate it, and they learn from him that this is what strength looks like. This isolation, this emotional unavailability, this slow suffocation. What he doesn't realize is that the qualities he's rejected in himself, the ones he's deemed weak or inappropriate or shameful, they contain enormous power. That sensitivity he's tried to kill off, it's also his capacity for empathy, for deep connection, for creating meaningful art or music or relationships. That vulnerability he sees as weakness, it's actually the foundation of courage, because it takes far more bravery to open your chest and show your heart than it does to keep your armor polished and your walls high. That anger he's terrified to feel, it contains vital information about his boundaries, his values, what matters to him enough to fight for. When we reject parts of ourselves, we don't eliminate them. We just lose conscious control over them. They continue to operate, but from the shadows. They influence our decisions, shape our reactions, sabotage our relationships, all without our awareness or consent. That's why he finds himself inexplicably drawn to or repelled by certain people. Why he overreacts to situations that shouldn't matter that much. Why he feels increasingly disconnected from his own life, even as he goes through all the right motions. The path forward isn't about becoming someone different. It's about becoming more completely himself, acknowledging and integrating all the parts he's spent years trying to eliminate. This doesn't mean indulging every impulse or expressing every emotion without filter. It means developing a relationship with his inner world that's based on curiosity rather than judgment, on acceptance rather than rejection. This starts with the radical act of simply noticing. When that feeling rises in his chest, whether it's sadness or fear or desire or rage, instead of immediately pushing it down or rationalizing it away, what if he just noticed it? Not to indulge it or act on it, but simply to acknowledge its presence. There's fear here. There's grief here. There's longing here. This simple act of recognition, without judgment, begins to change everything. Then comes the harder work of getting curious about what these feelings are trying to communicate. Emotions aren't random static interfering with our rationality. They're sophisticated information systems evolved over millions of years to tell us important things about our environment, our relationships, our needs. His anger might be telling him that a boundary has been violated. His sadness might be honoring a loss that needs to be grieved. His anxiety might be highlighting something that genuinely requires attention or change. But he can only receive these messages if he's willing to listen. This process often requires confronting the original wounds that taught him to shut down in the first place. Maybe it was a parent who responded to his tears with contempt or dismissal. Maybe it was a culture that told him real men don't feel, don't cry, don't need. Maybe it was a heartbreak that hurt so badly he vowed never to be that vulnerable again. These wounds created protective strategies that served him at the time. If showing emotion led to rejection or ridicule, then not showing emotion was a rational survival strategy for a child with limited options. But he's not that child anymore, even if part of him still operates from those old assumptions. He has resources now that he didn't have then. He has the capacity to choose his relationships, to create environments where vulnerability is met with respect rather than contempt. He has the ability to develop his own internal sense of worth that doesn't depend entirely on others' approval. He has the option to find people, whether friends, therapists, or communities, who can hold space for his full humanity. The transformation happens gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. He starts to notice a softening, a slight relaxation in the chronic tension he's carried for so long. He has a conversation where he says something true about how he actually feels, and the world doesn't end. His partner responds with relief rather than judgment, grateful to finally meet the real him. He discovers that the strength he's been performing all these years required far more energy than the genuine strength of showing up authentically, wounds and all. He learns that there's a profound difference between the isolation of suffering alone and the solitude of a man who knows himself well enough to rest in his own presence. The silence shifts from something oppressive to something nourishing. He discovers that he can hold complexity, that he can be both strong and vulnerable, both independent and connected, both rational and emotional. These aren't contradictions to be resolved, but paradoxes to be inhabited. His relationships deepen because he's no longer performing a role, but showing up as himself. His work becomes more meaningful because he's connected to the deeper motivations and values that drive him, not just going through the motions. His body begins to heal as he stops storing his pain in his muscles and organs. He sleeps better. He laughs more freely. He cries sometimes too, and discovers that tears aren't weakness, but release, not the end of strength, but its restoration. The man who is being killed by his silence gradually becomes a man who knows how to speak his truth, not aggressively or defensively, but clearly and authentically. He learns that there's power in saying, "I don't know," or "I need help," or "I'm scared," or "I'm hurting." He discovers that the people worth keeping in his life respond to this honesty with respect and deeper connection, while the ones who can only relate to his mask eventually fall away, making room for relationships based on reality rather than performance. This isn't a story about becoming perfect or transcending human vulnerability. It's about becoming whole. It's about gathering up all the scattered, rejected parts of himself and bringing them back into conscious awareness, where he can decide how to integrate them, rather than being controlled by them from the shadows. It's about recognizing that the goal was never to eliminate his humanity, but to inhabit it fully, with all its messiness and beauty and contradiction. The quiet that was killing him transforms into a different kind of silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of a man who has nothing left to prove, who is comfortable enough in his own skin that he doesn't need to fill every space with noise or performance. He becomes someone his younger self would have needed to meet, living proof that you can face the darkness within and not only survive, but emerge more fully alive. This is the work that nobody tells men they need to do, but that changes everything when they finally undertake it. Not self-improvement or optimization or becoming tougher, but the courageous act of turning toward themselves with honesty and compassion, of making peace with their full humanity, of learning that they can be both powerful and tender, both fierce and feeling, both strong enough to protect what matters and brave enough to let others see them truly. You know what I've noticed about him?
There's this silence he carries around. And at first I thought it was just his personality.
You know, the strong, quiet type. But the longer I've known him, the more I've realized it's not that kind of quiet at all. It's the quiet of someone who's drowning, but won't reach for the life preserver because he's convinced he should be able to swim on his own. It's the quiet of words caught in his throat, of feelings locked up so tight, I'm not sure even he has the key anymore. I see it in the way he says he's fine, when clearly, obviously, he's not fine. His jaw gets tight. His shoulders climb up toward his ears. And when you ask what's wrong, he just shakes his head and changes the subject. Just tired, he'll say. Work's been crazy. And maybe that's part of it, but it's not the whole story. Not even close. There's something deeper going on beneath that calm exterior. Something he's been carrying for so long, he probably doesn't remember what it feels like to set it down. What gets me is that he thinks he's protecting everyone by keeping it all inside. Like if he just bears it alone, suffers quietly, pushes through without complaint, then somehow that makes him stronger, makes him more of a man, keeps everyone else safe from his mess. But I watch what it's doing to him, and there's nothing strong about it. It's killing him, slowly, like poison he keeps drinking because someone once told him it was medicine. All those feelings he won't let himself express, they don't just evaporate. I've watched them come out sideways in ways I don't think he even recognizes. He'll be completely calm about something genuinely upsetting, and then he'll lose it over something tiny. A driver who cuts him off, a dish left in the sink, some minor inconvenience that shouldn't matter. And I realize that's not really about the dish or the traffic. That's all the other stuff, all the real stuff, finding whatever crack it can slip through because he's sealed off all the proper exits. I've seen how exhausted he is, even after a full night's sleep. There's this heaviness to him, like he's carrying invisible weight that gets heavier every day. And I know, it's because it takes so much energy to hold everything in, to police every feeling, to constantly monitor what he allows himself to show. He's running an internal security system 24/7, making sure nothing unauthorized escapes, and it's draining the life out of him. There are all these parts of himself he's just rejected completely, decided somewhere along the way weren't acceptable. The part that needs comfort sometimes, he's locked that away like it's shameful. The part that feels things deeply, that wants to create or express or just experience emotion without immediately shutting it down. He's built walls around that too. And I wonder sometimes about who he might have been if someone had told him it was okay to be all of those things. If he hadn't learned early on that half of his humanity was something to be ashamed of. His body is screaming at him now. The headaches that never go away. The back pain he's always trying to stretch out. The stomach issues that send him to doctors who can't find anything physically wrong. I watch him pop another painkiller and I want to tell him, your body isn't broken. It's trying to tell you something. It's keeping score of every emotion you refuse to process, and it's getting desperate to make you listen. But I know he'd just brush it off. Tell me he probably needs to work out more, or sleep better, or adjust his desk setup. And his relationships, God. Watching what this does to his relationships is maybe the hardest part. I see his partner trying to reach him, trying to have real conversations, trying to connect with the person underneath all that armor. And it's like throwing pebbles at a castle wall. Nothing gets through. She'll ask him how he's really feeling, and he gives her the same surface-level response he gives everyone. I'm good, just busy. And I can see her deflate a little more each time. See her slowly giving up on reaching the real him. because maybe she's starting to believe this distant version is all there is. His friends have stopped trying to. I've heard them talk about it, how they care about him, but they've learned there's no point asking real questions because they won't get real answers. So the conversations stay shallow, safe, meaningless. Sports and work and surface-level complaints about traffic or weather. Nobody talks about what actually matters, because he's trained everyone around him that deeper territory is off-limits. What breaks my heart is that I know he's not doing this to be cruel or distant. He genuinely thinks this is what he's supposed to do. Someone taught him, maybe lots of someones, over years and years, that this is what strength looks like. That real men shoulder everything alone. That feelings are weaknesses to be overcome, not information to be listened to. That vulnerability equals failure. And he's so committed to being what he thinks he should be that he's lost touch with who he actually is. I've watched him be drawn to certain people or situations and then pull back sharply like he touched something hot. And I realize those are probably the things that call to the parts of himself he's rejected. Someone expresses emotion freely, and he's both fascinated and repelled. Someone creates art or music without worrying whether it's practical, and something in him responds, then immediately shuts down. He's built such a narrow corridor of acceptable ways to be that anything outside those lines feels dangerous, even when what's outside those lines might be exactly what he needs. The thing is, I can see all the power in those rejected parts. That sensitivity he's tried to kill off, that's also what would let him connect deeply, create meaningfully, love without reservation. That vulnerability he sees as fatal weakness, that's actually where real courage lives. It takes so much more bravery to be open than to hide behind walls. That anger he's terrified to acknowledge, that contains important information about his boundaries, about what he values enough to fight for. But he can't access any of that power while he's busy trying to eliminate those parts of himself. I catch glimpses sometimes of who he might be underneath all this. Moments when his guard drops just slightly. Maybe he's had a couple drinks, or he's exhausted beyond the point of maintaining the performance, or something catches him off guard emotionally. And in those moments, I see this depth, this richness, this complexity that takes my breath away. I see someone who feels everything intensely, who has so much to offer, who could connect so deeply if he'd just let himself. And then the walls come back up, and he's gone again, back behind the fortress. I wonder about what happened to make him this way. What wounds he's carrying that taught him shutting down was safer than staying open. Maybe someone ridiculed him for crying when he was young. Maybe he lived in an environment where showing weakness got you hurt. Maybe he loved someone who left, and he decided never to risk being that vulnerable again. Whatever it was, those old survival strategies are still running, even though the original threat is long gone. He's still that scared kid sometimes, protecting himself from dangers that no longer exist, using defenses that have become prisons. What I wish I could tell him, what I have tried to tell him, though I'm not sure he can hear it yet, is that all this effort he's putting into appearing unbreakable is actually breaking him. That the performance of strength is so much harder than the actual strength of showing up as himself, whole and human and imperfect. That the people who truly care about him don't need him to be invulnerable. They're desperate for permission to know the real him, wounds and all. I've seen tiny shifts lately that give me hope. Moments where he's said something true about how he actually feels, and the world didn't end.
Conversations where he's let his guard down just slightly and discovered that people responded with care rather than judgment. I watched him cry once, actually cry, not just get teary-eyed. And afterward, he seemed lighter somehow, like he'd set down weight he didn't even know he was carrying. But mostly I watch him suffer in that silence, and I feel helpless because I can't do this work for him. Nobody can. He's the only one who can decide to turn toward himself with honesty instead of away with judgment.
He's the only one who can start noticing his feelings instead of immediately burying them. He's the only one who can get curious about what his emotions are trying to tell him instead of treating them like enemies to be defeated. I see the man he could be if he did that work. Someone who's still strong, but whose strength includes tenderness. Someone who's still capable, but who knows when to ask for help. Someone who can sit with complexity instead of forcing everything into rigid categories of acceptable and unacceptable. Someone who can be fully present in his relationships because he's not using all his energy maintaining walls. Someone who knows himself well enough to rest in his own presence without that undercurrent of war between different parts of himself. I imagine him sleeping peacefully instead of restlessly, laughing freely instead of that controlled chuckle he does now, crying when he needs to cry, and discovering that tears don't diminish him, they cleanse him. Having conversations where he says what he actually thinks and feels instead of what he thinks he should say. Building relationships based on reality instead of performance. Creating or expressing or simply experiencing life without that constant internal monitor telling him what's allowed. He's so busy trying not to need anyone that he's forgotten how to let people love him. He's so committed to being unshakable that he's made himself unreachable. And I watch this brilliant, complicated, deeply feeling man disappear further behind his defenses every day. And I want to shake him and tell him, you're not protecting anyone by disappearing. You're not being strong by suffering alone. You're just slowly erasing yourself. And the world needs whatever it is you're so busy hiding. Sometimes I wonder if he'll ever let those walls come down, or if he'll just keep maintaining them until he's so far removed from his own heart that he can't find his way back. I hope it's the former. I hope he finds his way to that place where he can hold all of himself, the light and the shadow, the strength and the vulnerability, the certainty and the doubt, without needing to exile half of his humanity to some dark basement of his consciousness. Because that quiet that's killing him, it could transform into something else entirely. Not the silence of suppression, but the peace of a man who knows himself, who has nothing left to prove, who's comfortable enough in his own skin that he doesn't need to perform for anyone. That man is in there somewhere, underneath all the armor. I've seen glimpses. I just hope he finds his way to him before the weight of all that silence becomes too much to bear.